Okay,
76.
let's
Ernie, before, what about tomorrow?
tomorrow we could do 8:00 in the morning.
Oh, shit. All right. Okay.
That way we don't have to worry about the afternoon.
Where's the afternoon? I waited at 8:00 in the morning. I get interrupted with a phone call, but it's okay. It's okay. Go on.
Okay. We're on Ayin Hey Amud Beis. We're going to do Ayin Vav tonight, 76. But we're going to start with the last line of Ayin Hey Amud Beis. Itmar. Cham tocham, hot piece of meat falls on a hot piece of cheese. Or a kosher piece of meat fell into a hot soup that has nevela absorbed in it, or chazer absorbed in it. So hot into hot. So those of us who learned Survim Rabbana, we know that the blios, the flavors exchange with heat. So cham utacham, divrei hakol, osur. Everybody holds that all the food items will be prohibited. Rashi says, "Debola heter mi isur." The permitted item absorbed the isur item because it's cham b'tocham. Now, a cold piece of steak, tzonei l'toch tzonei, cold piece of steak falls on a cold piece of cheese, or a cold piece of steak falls on a cold piece of ham. Divrei hakol mutter. So all you need is hadacha. You just have to wash it off, rinse it off. You don't have to do klipa. There's no absorption of any kind of heter. Excuse me. There's no absorption of any isser because it's cold. Now, the more interesting question is cham l'toch tzonein. Something hot is on top, and something cold is on the bottom. Or vice versa. Tzonein l'tocham. Something cold is on top, and something else is on the bottom hot. So Rav Omar Ilo Gavar. Rav says whatever's on top dominates. So Hilkach Cham l'toch tzonein, if hot piece of meat is on top of cold piece of cheese, the cheese becomes osur. The whole cheese, the whole piece. Sha'el yon mechamamo l'tachton. The hot item on top heats up the bottom one. They'll absorb from each other. But according to Rav Tzon l'tocham mutter, if a cold piece of cheese is sitting on top of a hot piece of steak, it doesn't transfer flavor. Sha'el yon minatzchol l'tachton v'lo boli. There will be no absorption because the one that's on top rules. However, Shmuel Omar Tatov Govar. Shmuel says the opposite. The bottom rules. Hilkach, cham l'toch tzonein, hot piece of meat on top of a cold piece of cheese. Mutter, the bottom piece of cheese would be permitted. We'll see. It's not. You got to either rinse it off, or we'll see. You have to remove a klipa, but it doesn't prohibit the whole thing. However, a cold piece of cheese sitting on top of a hot piece of meat, the whole cheese becomes osur. Because we know that heat rises. We paskin like Shmuel. I'll read you the Shulchan Aruch. Heter shenafal l'toch isser. A piece of permitted meat fell into a prohibited soup or landed on something that was usher, or milk with meat, and it's hot, kol roteach l'toch roteach, so everybody holds that that's prohibited. And if a cold falls on top of something hot, everything is usher, unless there's 60 times amount of heter versus the isser. Now, if a hot piece of something fell on something cold, you just have to rinse it, or we'll see you take a klipa off of it, umutter. So the poskim like Shmuel, that tato govar. There's a famous sugya in Yoredeya 91. It's not. So the Gemara wants to bring a proof to either Rav and Shmuel based on our Mishnah. Not of mirot balacheres. We said that if you had a Korban Pesach cooking and some of the gravy splattered on a piece of clay, like a chera, like either the oven or there was a piece of clay there, and then it bounced back, chazar elav to the Korban Pesach. So the Mishnah said that piece of meat of the Korban Pesach was heated not by the fire directly, but rather by the hot gravy that bounced off the cheres. So the Mishnah said, Yitos Makomo, you have to remove kedei natila of the meat because it's not kosher there, because the Korban Pesach has to be roasted. Now, the Gemara assumes, Kosal Kedaitich, Becheres Tzoynenes, that the clay piece was cold. So, Bishmal Rav Domer, Ilo Govar. So, according to Rav, who said that whatever's on top dominates, so the Mishum Hachi, Yitos Makomo, that's why you have to remove the Kedei Natila. Why? The Ozol Roitef Martech Leila Cheres. The hot gravy lands on the cheres, and it bounces back. The Pesach now is being heated by the heat generated from the cheres, not from tzliyesh. But Ela Shmuel the Omer Tato Govar, that you only look at what's on the bottom. Cheres given to Tzoynenhu, since the cheres is cold, Akuri maker leila roitiv, it should cool off the gravy, and then when it bounces back, it's considered like the tato, and therefore it shouldn't aser, like we said. If the cold is on the bottom and something problematic hot is on top, it doesn't transfer the problem to the dvar heter. So then amai yitos bekomo. So Kedam Rav Yirmi Amar Shmuel, we're not talking here about the meat itself. We're talking about the soiles roisachas. There was hot flour, not a cold piece of cheres. Chanami becheres roseh. So both were hot, and we said divrei hakol aser. That's why you have to take a kedei natila. So Tanan, not of meroit valasoiles. If some of the gravy went to the flour, so we said yikmotzes makomo, you have to remove a kmitza of the flour. Now, again, the havamina is kasat daitich b'soilet soinenes. The flour is cold. And then bishmal rav, that we look at what's on top, which is the Korban Pesach. Domer ilo gav mishmachi yikmotzes makomo, because it's going to aser, that's what's below. The mirtach lolosoiles, the hadar ordinate, the hadar soiles, mirtach lolidei. The kamat v'roit of machmas chavimusa the soiles, the gravy is getting heated because the flour is hot. Rachman amar tzliesh v'lo tzli machmas davar acher, and you have to have cooking directly from the fire. So that makes sense according to Rav. El Shmuel domer tato gavar. According to Shmuel, who says that we look that what's on the bottom is what's important. And if soil is given to tsoynenesi, if the flour is cold, it's going to cool everything off. There's not going to be a isser. Why do you have to remove that? Again, we're not talking about a cold flour, we're talking about a hot flour. So cham l'tocham divrei hakol osir. Okay, third case of the Mishnah. So now, socha b'shemen shel truma, you anointed the Korban Pesach with olive oil that belonged to truma. So no problem in chavuras kohanim yochlu. If the group subscribed to the Korban Pesach as a group of kohanim, then they can eat it, no problem. But im shel Yisrael, so it depends. Im chayru, if it was raw and it's cold, so yidichenu, just have to rinse it off. But im tzoliu, if it was roasted, yiklof as achitz, and you have to remove the shemen, and at least a klipa worth, at least a fingernail worth. So Bishmal Rav Domer Eloi Gavar, since the shemen is on top, we look at what's on top. Amtalachi sagile beklipa. So there's a prohibition mishum di ilot soinim, because that the shemen was cold. Since it's cold, all you got to do, it doesn't prohibit the whole korban pesach, just kidei klipa. And l'shmuel domer tato gavar. But according to Shmuel, where the korban pesach is what dominates, it's hot. So kevan dechamu mablabola. Then the whole shemen absorbed. Amai sagile beklipa. The whole thing should be osir. So again, that seems to prove Rav. More says shiny sicha, the mashru ba'alba David. Can't bring a riot from it. They only used a very, very small amount of oil. Not enough to osir the whole pesach. So the Gemara brings a beraisa like Shmuel. Tani kavos is Shmuel. Cham u'tocham, right? He said a hot piece of steak on a hot piece of cheese or hot soup. Usr. Everything is usr. All the prohibited is usr. Something cold is on top of something hot, usr. But cham u'tochtzone, something hot on top of something cold, and something cold on top of something cold, then all you got to do is mediach, wash it off. The Gemara now is going to ask a very important question. Well, there's a little heat. The maker lay, while it's being cooled down a little bit, there's got to be some absorption in the heterodictic thing. Klipa mia niboy. We should therefore require a klipa. It shouldn't be enough to just wash it off. But cold on cold is all you got to do is mediach. That's our halacha. That's the Shulchan Aruch in Nun Yud in Tzadik Aleph brings down that you have to remove a klipa. Cham u'tochtzon. Tanya Yidich, and that's why we paskin like Shmuel because of this brisa. Tanya Yidich. There's another brisa Basar V'Yisech Shnafel Tochalav V'Seh. Hot meat fell into hot milk. So both the meat and the milk are going to be prohibited. V'chein tzoinen, cold piece of meat fell into hot milk, asur. Cham u'tochtzon, hot piece of meat fell on top of a piece of cheese. Hot piece of meat fell on top of a cold piece of cheese. Or cold on cold, mediach, all you got to do is rinse it off. Cham u'tochtzon mediach, I understand, even the chamu, since it's hot, ad the maker lay, fine, it's being cooled down, but until it cools down, you have to like bala porta. There's got to be some absorption through the heat. Klipa mia niboy. Why is it good to just do hadacha? You should require klipa. In fact, you do klipa, except like I said, a cold steak falls on top of a cold piece of cheese or on a piece of ham. There's no prohibition. You just rinse it off. There's no transfer of flavor. Omar Mar. We said cold onto cold. There's no prohibition. You just have to rinse it off. That's if one of the items had not been salted. If it had been salted so much that you could not eat it because of how salty it is, Osir. Then there is, melicha is like roseach. Having something salted is like heat, and there will be transfer, and it will answer both things. The Omar Shmuel Maliach hareyu karoseach. Salting is like cooking, is like boiling. And kavush hareyu kamavushal. If you soak something for 24 hours, or if you soak it in vinegar, that's called kavush. There's also transfer of flavor, even though it's cold. It's got to be so salty that otherwise it can't be eaten. If it can be eaten low, that means this geder of malich has to be very, very strong. There was a bird. It was a shechted bird. Piece of meat. L'chora, and it fell into kutach. It fell into mayonnaise, lakata de kamko, which is made out of milk. Shari Rav China Breda Rav Mi Pashrunya. He permitted to be eaten. He permitted the bird to be eaten. It was cold, but the question is, was it salted? So, who is so smart to be matter like this? He loved Rav China Breda Rav Mi Pashrunya. They got a rabbu. Because when did Shmuel say if it's salted, it transfers flavor? That's when it's so salty that you can't eat it because of how salty it is. But this bird was not salted so much, so therefore there was no absorption. They're both cold. Right? That's if it was not cooked. It was cold and raw. Aval tzli, if it was roasted, even though it's cold, boy klipa, the roasting of the bird will make it soft and allow it to absorb more, just through the roasting process. Right? Rashi says, "Bargoza tsoinen avu." We're talking about something cold, but roasting it and then cooling it. Of course, if it's hot, there's no shaila. And also, it can't have cracks. Aval isbei pili, if it has cracks, usr, because there will be absorption. And the metuvel, the tavli, also usr. If it was very spiced, then it also gets soft and will absorb. Amara. Besar shchuta shamein. You have a fatty piece of kosher meat. Shetzlo in bsar nevela kachush. In the same oven, you roasted it, or you over the fire, you broiled it or grilled it, tzli, with a piece of nevela meat. The piece of nevela meat was not fatty. Rashi says, Toner Shnei Shpur, you have two spits in an oven. They're not touching each other. Zeh rochok mizeh. Osir. Shareach min hashemen, min hashamein, the fact that the kosher piece of meat is fatty, that smell, nichnas lekachush umafatmoi. It goes into the piece of non-fatty nevela, but makes it fatty. Then the choizer zeh, so the fatty nevela now, moitzi reach gamhu, it gives off its aroma. and that will answer the kosher piece of meat. And says Rashi, if the piece of nevela was the fatty piece, well, the chatchila, it's already a problem. You don't have to go. It's not a ping pong game. And the Revusa Shmina Rav, the Chiddush Rav is telling us, the lo name of nevela chusha hoil ve'ein reicha noidef lo asr la l'shchuta. The Chiddush is that the fatty kosher meat will sort of transfer its fattiness over to the nevela meat. Huge Chiddush, which is a lot of halachic nafkamiyas. My time and mafat me'amadodi, right? They fatten each other up. However, Levi Omar, afilu psar shchuta kochush, shetzolo im psar nevela shamin mutter. Levi holds, if you have a kosher piece of meat that's not fatty, that you roasted in the same oven with a piece of treif meat, fatty, mutter. My timer, because what's going on here? They're not touching. If they touch, then there's transfer. But they're not touching here. You're relying on reicha ba'almu, just odor. V'reicha lav milsahi. Reicha has no halachic significance. Ovid Levi uvda be'reish galusa. Levi was consistent with his own psak. Bigdiva dovrach with a goat and a piece of chazer, and no problem. Meisvei ain't soilin shnei psachim ke'echad. We don't roast two korban pesachs in the same oven as one. Mipnei taruvis. And what's going to happen is the flavor of one is going to go into the other. And people who are going to eat of this korban pesach were not subscribed to that because each one was subscribed to their own. Even if one was a goat, one was a sheep, where you don't mix them up. But the halacha is, so the Gemara says, my love taruvis tamim. And what kind of taruvis? That their flavors are mixing because they're fattening each other up through the air, like we said about the if it's fatty, and then it's going to be a problem because people who are not subscribed to it are going to eat the wrong korban pesach. And therefore, what do we see from here? That reicha is milsa, because one korban pesach is being affected by the other through odor. Kasha lelevi. Or it says a little bit they taruv is goofy. We don't want people to mistake shlois arvu zeh b'zeh, and even a sheep and a goat, because after you take the hide off, you don't know, and people can mix them up. And then one group's going to eat the korban pesach that they were not subscribed to, not because of the word's flavor. So there's no kasha on Levi. That makes logical sense. Because later on it says even a goat and a sheep. Right? I don't know because people will make the mistake. But if it has to do with flavor, one flavor going into the other, which doesn't, and the people don't own that one, is going to be a problem. So the problem is with two korban pesachs, because they're two different bodies and they're going to mix them up. And what? Taruvas tamim shori, but mixture of flavor is not a problem. Well, if that's the case, there'll be le'matevet to the Rav, who said reicha is milsahi. And here you're saying it would not be reicha. We hold like Levi. The korban pesach in this case was cooked in two closed pots, so they couldn't have exchange of flavor. Frag the Gemara, you can't cook the korban pesach in a kedeir. It's got to be sliyesh. You cooked it like two kederos, like you separated them. You can't roast two korban pesachs because of mixture. Now, my tarubis tamim, flavor. Afilu ke'ein shtei kederos. And even if you do it somehow like two different kederos, by separating them, making a mechitza between them, it still would be osir because mishum tarubas gufin afilu gdivit like, because people could mix up the two bodies as well, and you end up one group eating something that they've not been subscribed to. Just want to read the halacha from Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Hey. Ain't solim psar heter ve'isr betaner echad. We don't roast a piece of kosher meat and a piece of non-kosher meat in the same oven. Gam kishe'enam nogim zeh b'zeh, even if they don't touch each other. Ve'im salam, but if you roasted it mutter, b'di'evet it's mutter. Afilo haya isr shamin v'heter kochush. Even if the non-kosher meat was fatty, because nifsaka halacha kalevi, because the halacha is like Levi. So if the halacha is like Levi, why don't they permit you to do it lechatchila? It's only b'di'evet that they permitted. Because it seems like Levi also, when he permitted, they only did it b'di'evet, not lechatchila. That's how Rashi and Tosfos learn here. And we also see there are other halachas where we hold that reicha is milsa. So that answers the shaila here. This sugya seems to be a steer to that.
Ernie, so if you take a barbecue and you didn't kosher it properly, and it's a barbecue, you went on a vacation at Chveis, and the barbecue you're using, a barbecue was used by other people, but you think you kosher it, but you didn't kosher it properly. So then the meat that you cooked on it would be kosher.
No, that's different, Walter, because there is flavor absorbed into the metal grill. See, that's a blia. That's not reicha. Here you're talking about two kosher. You have a kosher oven. The grills are kosher. You have one piece of meat on a silver foil that's non-kosher, and the other piece of meat that's kosher. So they're not touching each other. So there, the transfer of blia here has to do with reicha. So here we paskin like Levi that reicha is lav milsa. There, the blia is enough. You can answer me, but a blia in a kli is livgam beyond 24 hours.
So let me ask you, if you took...
Hang on, let's continue. So if it's nois and tam livgam beyond 24 hours, but lechatchila, we're not allowed to use a kli that is bola isser even beyond 24 hours. But b'di'evet, if somebody came to a rav to ask a shaila that it was done and it was beyond 24 hours, technically you wouldn't make them throw the food away.
Okay, so technically, if you took a piece of tin foil and you put it on the barbecue, that would be kosher. Yeah,
because reicha lav milsi.
Okay, I do that. Okay, but that would be kosher lechatchila.
No, because I just read the Shulchan Aruch that Rashi and Tosfos here hold that when Levi mattered, he also only mattered b'di'evet, not lechatchila. Our halacha is, I read the halacha, lechatchila you're not allowed to do it. B'di'evet, if someone did it, it's permitted. Now, some hold that it's the shape of the oven. Shemena taner patuach tzat. The ovens have to be open a little bit, otherwise it would be osir. And also, if one of the items were spicy, then it's osir. Others say that if there's more than 60 heter against the isser, then everybody would hold it would be permitted. So this is we'll get back to this. I mean, we will summarize later on all the dinim of reicha. Okay, where are we? Back to the Gemara. Amar Rav Mary. Kitanoi. Haroide paschama. Person is baking bread on the side of that's how they made it. And they're using like one of those pizza spatulas to remove the bread. They put this hot piece of bread on top of a barrel of wine. But the wine was truma. And there is reyach of the wine wafting onto the bread. The bread's hot. Rav Meir Oyster. Rav Meir says that the truma flavor goes into the bread and a Yisrael cannot eat it. Rav Yehuda Matir. We'll see. It must be because Rav Yehuda says Reicha Lav Milsa. Rav Yossi Matir b'shal chitin voice b'shal so'oyer. Rav Yossi says wheat does not absorb, but barley does. Now, my love, it seems like this case is demonstrating machlokes Tanoim. The Mar Sava Rav Meir holds Reicha, Rav Yehuda holds Reicha Lav Milsahi. Umar Sava Reicha Milsahi. So Levi Vade Tanoi. So Levi would have to say it's machlokes Tanoim. LeRab, do we say name a Tanoi? Am L'charav no. Kulam Reicha Milsahi. Really, Reicha does have nafkamina halacha. Because Lavit Marallah Dahi, we learned on that case, if the barrel of wine had a lid off of it, Divra Kol Osir, and the past soinenes for Chavis Magufa, if the bread was cold and the barrel was sealed, Divra Kol Mutter. Hot bread and the barrel is sealed. Or past sonenes, cold bread, v'chavis psucha. The hanami kepas chama v'chavis psucha dami. The two korban pesachs in one oven is like the case of pas chama and chavis psucha, where we see we have this machlokes. Tony Rav Kanabrei Rav China Saba, pas shafoim tzli betanur. Oh, this halacha we know. If you baked bread with a piece of roast meat in the same oven, right? You made fleshik bread because the bread will absorb the reach of the meat. You can't eat it with milk. There was a piece of fish that was roasted in the oven, not touching each other, with a piece of meat. He prohibited the fish to be eaten with milk. Even if it didn't have milk in it, you wouldn't be able to eat it because there's sakana. Kasha l'reicha l'davar acher. First, it leads to bad breath by eating fish cooked with meat. And there's a sakana. That's why we don't eat meat and fish together. Davracha, says,
Harold, is that true? Harold, is that true? Does it lead to bad breath?
It says kasha l'reicha, reach peh. You have to do some experiments, Harold.
Make an appointment to find out. Only herring. If you eat herring and flesh, then it's a problem.
Pasha ofayim basar tzlui b'tanur. You cannot, if you roast a piece of bread in the same oven with a piece of meat, you cannot eat the bread with milk. Unless the oven was very big, that holds a huge thing and has an open thing, then it's mutter. That's the Tur b'shem Tosfos. By the way, if you bake the bread but the roasted meat is covered, then the bread is okay. Uleikar adin masbirin shepasku akol kafi kein lefi shagam levi maskimin zel iser she'afu oiser berech lechatchila. Like we said before, like Walter when he asked this question, really Levi asers lechatchila. It's only b'diavad that they permit.
Yeah, Ernie.
Yes.
many like cookies and cakes, they're the hashgacha is like dairy equipment, and I'm wondering, is it because the equipment gets hot?
Yes. Yes.
Because the heat transfer. That's
yes. Yes. Yeah, but we have to remember we learned in Surba, if it's nois and tam, bar nois and tam, right? If it's not direct, then it would be permitted. Yeah, so you have to know exactly what they're talking about. You really do. And we discussed some of that in Surba. Mishnah. Chamisha dvorim boim betuma. There are 5 korbanos that you're allowed to offer on the mizbeach, even though you're in a state of tumah, but the eina necholim betumah, but you can't eat it. So ha'oimer, the minchas ha'oimer brought on the second day of Pesach. If Klal Yisrael is in a state of tumah, you bring the oimer, but you don't eat it. The shtei lechem korban on Shavuos, or the lechem aponim. They're brought and offered, but not eaten. The zivchei shalmei tzibur, that's the shtei kvasim of Shavuos. Useir Rosh Chodoshim, the goat that is brought on Rosh Chodesh. All these 5 korbanos are offered but not eaten. However, HaPesach sheba betuma, korban Pesach that is brought when even somebody is tamei nechol betuma, you still can eat it. Shelo ba mitchilos olachi, the whole korban Pesach is to eat it, not like the other korbanos, which is not necessary for eating. Now, the Mishnah is not a math book. If the Mishnah mentions 5 items, well, it understands that I can count, and I know it's going to be 5. So to say chamisha dvarim, and then you list 5 things, the chamisha dvarim is superfluous. We don't need to be said chamisha. So therefore, it must be coming to exclude something. Lemeute mai, lemeute chagigas chamisha. That means we said there's a korban chagiga, which is brought on the 15th. So that korban you don't bring in a state of tumah. Now you might have thought this agidai given the korban tzibur. The whole tzibur has to bring it. Ukvile moed, and it's kovei an yontiv. So just like other korbanos that are kovei an yontiv, titche tumah should be doiche tumah kamash balan. There's a reason. Kiven de isli tashlumin kol shiva. Listen, the korban chagiga you don't have to necessarily bring on the first day. You have 7 days for tashlumim to bring it. So therefore, loy dachi Shabbos. Umit Shabbos loy dachi, there's a rule. If it doesn't dachi Shabbos, loy dachi tumah. So, freit the Gemara v'nisni nami seira regolim. Why did it mention the goats that are brought on Yontif, that they're also dachi tumah? So the Gemara answers, Atana le'zivchei shlamit tzibur. They fit under the category that the Mishnah talked about of zivchei shalmei tzibur, the shlamim that are brought by the tzibur, like the shnei chvasim. So then, if that's the case, but if you're going to tell me that the sa'ir brought on Yontif falls under the category of zivchei shalmei tzibur, then you should have left out the goat brought on Rosh Chodesh, the hatana zivchei shalmei tzibur, because you could have put that into that category as well. Amri, that there was a special chiddush seir Rosh Chodesh Yitzchak away. The chiddush we'll learn tomorrow morning.
All right.
8 o'clock.